Hey all! The self-destruct or auto-destruct sequences are climactic moments in Star Trek. This video is looking into the actual act of self-destruction as opposed to the rules and situations around the use of such. I'm not going to recite all the various codes used, because frankly they can be anything, and there's always the chance one of those codes will set your device on countdown. When the self-destruct is warranted, the commanding officer has to provide their security clearance, then state their part of the destruct code to the main computer. In most vessels, more verification is required, but depending on the mission profile and general orders of the time, sometimes solely the captain's discretion was all that was needed. In the likely event verification was required, the executive officer was asked to concur or provide their authorization. Some vessels also required a biometric signature, like fingerprints. If the EXO was not available, then at least 2 members of the senior staff were required to provide their destruct codes instead. With the command accepted, the computer would then ask for specifics in countdown, with a silent countdown or reminders at set intervals, and a timer length. By default it was 5 minutes, with 1 minute warnings then every 30 seconds decreasing as the time ran out. There would be a ship-wide announcement clarifying the order to the crew. Amendments could be made to the timer by the highest ranking officers still aboard, and conscious, as long as they were above a certain rank. There appears to be no limit to when the countdown can be cancelled, with even a last second desist being permitted. This is because of the numerous safeties around the warp core that can bring it back from even the brink of collapse. Check out my video on a core breach breakdown if you want to see more specifics. Evacuation is expected, and during the self-destruct sequence, other systems are triggered too if they were not already. After all, alert status does also divert a small amount of power to the escape pods and emergency systems, and any situation that calls for a self-destruct is likely already calling for a red alert. Either way, people are directed to their nearest escape pods, which, if you are where you are supposed to be during an alert, such as at your station, then allocations would already have been determined. Failing this, the computer can direct you to one or a shuttlecraft or transporter. Throughout the timer, the computer begins stockpiling the antimatter reserves and preparing to basically open the tanks, dumping it all into the warp core without concern. Then, as the timer hits 0, it lets the reaction flow without engaging the warp drive and simultaneously drops magnetic containment. Instant core breach. The potency of this explosion depends on the class of vessel. A Galaxy class would explode with the force of 1,500 photon torpedo detonations. The same is true for the Defiant class, as these ran equivalent warp cores. Hopefully by then the pods have made their escape to the minimum safe distance at impulse speeds. Because of the limitations of preparing the overload combined with the escape distance required, there appears to be a minimum time requirement that you just can't accelerate. There are actually multiple ways for the auto-destruct to engage, and various modes, each designed for different scenarios. These differing modes were selected based on the code provided for the self-destruct authorization. The primary method involves the aforementioned overloading of the primary warp core, deliberately causing a containment breach and allowing a warp core explosion to occur. In this instance, most of the ship's matter is either reduced to minimal fragments, vaporized, or simply annihilated entirely by the antimatter. This is the most destructive outcome and leaves little to no salvageable wreckage, useful for both inflicting maximum damage to an enemy and completely depriving others of Starfleet technology. However, because of this, it's not always the best option. This leads to the second self-destruct program that we have seen in action, scuttling. the one that claimed the Enterprise NCC-1701. This destruct sequence vented the antimatter reserves just before destruction, reducing the explosion. What was left in the system was used to overcharge the electroplasma conduits, holding the charge in capacitors before releasing it when the timer hit 0. This causes severe explosions across every system on the ship, coupled with the detonation of specialist charges around the vessel to ensure critical areas were destroyed first. This method would not entirely destroy the hardy vessels and leave a large amount of wreckage, but the goal was to ensure that what was left was a burned out and useless husk. This was used when allies were too close to risk a core breach, or over an M-class world where the antimatter explosion might cause too much damage. Believe it or not, the potential of raining debris was preferable. Theoretically, you might see a vessel in the build-up to this actually dropping its power output, but rising in power generation as it begins to hoard the charge for the imminent release. Originally, the self-destruct sequence had only been the form of variety with the voluntary destabilization of the warp reactor. However, this soon presented a problem that if the core was offline, then you could not even auto-destruct the ship. In cases of capture, this is a major security issue. So, the second method was added as a backup in the mid-23rd century, and has been a feature of all Starfleet vessels since, especially vessels that feature the ability to separate into parts, depriving them of a warp core. Additionally, if the main computer is damaged, there's a chance that the system will not be able to activate the self-destruct and manual action is required. Whether that be setting up an overload yourself and fleeing, or simply turning a full power phaser on the core. As an aside, the self-destruct of Romulan vessels either follows one of two ways. On their older, antimatter-matter vessels, it's much the same. However, with those that feature an artificial singularity, a second method of destruction is to remove all of the containment around the micro black hole and allow it to implode the surrounding superstructure into a point. Of course, there are all sorts of other creative ways one can find to destroy their own ships. Set course for a sun, run maximum warp beyond its limits, be an Oberth class. But that covers the law of the auto-destruct sequence and what occurs around its use. I've been Rick, and until the next one, 000 destruct 1, go. I'm out of here.
Auto-destruct sequence arm.
Wait, what?